Paul Galatis, so good to have you on the Heavy Chef Show.
Thank you, Frederick.
It's good to see you back in the country. So you've been traveling quite a bit, and
I have.
and you've got a little bit of that 1,000-yard stare going on, and I think it's mainly due to names and faces, which is not just a term; it's actually the name of your company. And I think maybe just to start off this conversation, just to kind of elaborate what exactly is Names and Faces and what's it all about?
Cool. So Names and Faces is a business born out of a frustration of joining companies and teams where I just don't know who's who. I was involved in Yuppie Chef previously. My two partners started it, Andrew and Shane, and then we grew it and had about 50 people. I walked into the office one day and I was like, who's who in this team? Who's that person who we hired 3 weeks ago? Right? I interviewed her, I know her background. But I just need her name very quickly, and it sits in our system somewhere that I don't use. And so we make visual employee directories, really brutally simple visual employee directories for organizations of anything from about 60 people up to about 2,000 people. And it's an app, and it's a mobile, app on your phone and on web, and we are selling that to the world as a SaaS offering.
That's amazing. So it's a real kind of built for purpose utilitarian app. I mean, it's completely focused, it's stripping away all the kind of fluff that I guess you would see in a social media type of.
So there are three things that we kind of say we're not a social network of any kind. No one pokes anyone, pings anyone, likes anyone. I don't need to read your stream of consciousness. Right? We're not an
no
HR tool.
Of your food or cats.
No pictures of your food or cats. We're not an HR tool. Right, and we're not a comms tool, right? Okay. Directories historically have always been byproducts of other generally bigger, clunkier systems. Sure. You have an HR system, it does performance reviews, it does leave management, etc., etc. Oh, and it spits out a directory. You have security management on your office premises, and oh, and it spits out a directory. The directory is this afterthought. We want to bring the directory front and center because we believe that the only reason you hire people in your company is to work with other people.
Sure.
And so many of the relationships that I've battled to build. I started my first job at Standard Bank 23 years ago, and I arrived on the 5th floor, and there are 90 people around me, and I'm just like, who's who? And it takes me 6 months to build the confidence to say hello to that person in the canteen. Yeah. It's a barrier that I think is completely unnecessary, and we've gone off on a tangent in our tech with Facebook and LinkedIn, and where everything is just so like, everything's about eyeballs and engagement. Like, I just need a list of who's who in my company. I need to be available to me in 2 seconds, no matter where I am. And so that's what we do. And it's a SaaS product.
That's amazing, and it's super focused, and it's beautiful in an age where I think there's a lot of complexity around us. That you're creating something that's simple and elegant and really, really focused. And I suppose, obviously, it's a real need, and also something that our friends and colleagues over in Silicon Valley have agreed with you in that it's a real need, in that you're now living over there, right?
Yeah, living in Palo Alto, about 40 minutes south of San Francisco, and moved over there in January. So we've been there for about 10 months.
Okay, and can we just touch upon that, the quick story of it's Y-Combinator, right? You went through Y-Combinator, and then you got additional funding and so on and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit about that process and how that happened?
So we were on YC's 2018 summer batch. So that was June, July, August 2018. I had started Names and Faces, and we were growing, and we built a little MVP. We had a handful of clients here in the UK. Here being South Africa.
Sure.
And I went over at the beginning of 2017, and I showed a friend of mine who was the MD of AMV BBDO, which is one of the biggest ad agencies in the UK.
Okay.
And I said, let me show you what I'm working on. We had breakfast together, and he looked at Names and Faces, and he was like, wow, that would be super useful for me. He said, I employ 450 people, we spread over 2 floors, I'm the MD, I pride myself on knowing who's who, and it is just super difficult.
It's impossible, right? Yeah.
And so he bought it as our first UK client. And then over the next few months, 2 other people bought it who are colleagues of his at other agencies, and they bought it through him. And long story short, at the end of the year, he pinged me and he said, look, I think this is exciting, should we talk? And so he resigned from AMV and joined me as my co-founder.
Wow.
So the 2 of us were now on board. We had started building a team out in South Africa, in Cape Town, one evening I randomly, I'd been following Y-Combinator for 15 years.
Sure.
Paul Graham's writings
He's amazing.
are
Yeah, for
amazing.
sure.
And I'd said to Rich, like, if there's any kind of incubator accelerator thing that I'd be interested in getting involved in, it would be YC. Having been through the Yuppie Chef journey with Andrew and Shane, we'd built a lot ourselves, and we'd done that kind of outside of any incubator or accelerator, so I didn't have a strong inclination to get involved in one, but YC was kind of the quintessential original, really. They backed Dropbox, Airbnb, Stripe.
They're the best alumni the best in the business, for sure.
And I was in London, and I saw that the deadline for YC was that night, or midnight in the US, which was kind of 5 a.m., 6 a.m., whatever it was in the UK. And so I said to Rich, I'm going to write this application. So I spent the evening awake, whatever it was, 8-9 hours, completing this application. It's not a very complicated application, you just need to give it thought. Applied. A couple of weeks later, about a week later, got a message saying, we really liked your application, would you join us online for a 10-minute Skype interview? So we're like, great. So we met with a guy called Gustav Allerstromer, who was the previous head of growth at Dropbox. 10-minute Skype interview, tell me about your business. And he's kind of just firing questions at you, like, why do you think there's a massive addressable market? Tell me what you've done to date, blah, 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 blah. And he's really just kind of picking things out. And at the end of the interview, he said, look, I think this is really great. We'll be in touch in the next day or two. And then they pinged us saying, would you come to San Francisco for a 10-minute in-person interview? And so we went over to San Francisco.
That's a good thing, right?
We think it's a good thing.
It's a really bad thing if you don't hear anything. Then you're pretty much dead in the water, right?
So we got invited over. They pay for you to go over. So we flew over, 10-minute in-person interview. Also and they brief you, don't be intimidated by it, but there are 4 people at the table, and they're going to just drill you on all kinds of things. Okay. And then that evening they phoned and they said, we really like what you're doing. We think that, so going back to, why do they see opportunity? They've said, we've all worked in big companies, fast-growing companies. Everyone has this challenge. Everyone somehow tries to make their own solution. They're emailing Excel spreadsheets around the company once a month. Someone's making a PowerPoint deck of who's who. Someone's sending out like an arrival email of who's who. But this idea of like, where is the really quickly accessible, usable directory that isn't crap and badly populated and hard to get to doesn't really exist.
Yeah,
and I think that's what they saw.
The infamous intranet, right? Yeah. Which nobody ever needs, no users, and it's just a waste of money, right?
Totally. And often only accessible on your desktop, and it's like, that's not how we live these days.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they saw in it. They were convinced by the universal applicability of it. We had already shown evidence. We had not many clients, but we had clients in the UK, we had a client in Australia, we had a client in Singapore, we had a client, and then a handful of clients in South Africa. And we'd sold to these people remotely, right? Not pure SaaS, not where they just paid online, but 1 or 2 conversations, a few emails, and they paid and they were online.
Wow.
And so I think that's really what got them excited about it.
So they saw already like a traction, some kind of test case that was being used and it was being appreciated by a group of people, right?
I think they saw that. I also, I don't need to get into the backstory, but 22 years ago, I made a names and faces book in my final year of high school because I was frustrated that we were 500 students on one campus, walking past each other every day, and I was like, who is that guy? And so I made a book, right? I made a physical book. And in the following year, 7 other schools got hold of me and said, please make these books for us as well. And so for year after year, I was making these books. And then when I got into my first job, as I mentioned, Standard Bank, it's like, maybe a book would be really useful here, but then you realize a book wouldn't work. And so they not only found someone who had traction, but I think they found someone who'd been obsessing about this product for 22 years.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that idea
of, interesting. You living, breathing, it's in your DNA.
Is this really a problem that you want to solve?
Sure.
And can you show evidence that you know more about this category than anybody else does?
Sure.
So I think that's quite a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I met Paul Harris once, the founder of First Strand, and he said the one question he asked me was, "What are you the best in the world at?" And I think that question is quite universal about people who understand business. Is they want to know what is the thing that you're the most passionate about, what you feel that you can really make money and make a difference, and ultimately really grow into and make something your own. So
I called John Bradshaw, who's a friend, who's a marketing director at Pick and Pay, a few years ago. He really liked what we were doing, and I said to him, "Can you help articulate why names and faces is useful? Like, why do you think this is useful?" And he said to me, there's a question that's often asked, I think by Peter Thiel or by Paul Graham, I don't know who, which is, what do you know about the world that no one else yet knows? And he said to me, he said, I think your answer to that is that knowing someone's name is a far more powerful lever to achieving cooperation than what anyone gives it credit for.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a wordy response, but it's kind of interesting. And
Sure.
and I think that when you're presenting a solution to people that it is for a problem almost that they didn't yet know or don't yet know they have, but as soon as you articulate it and you're like, yeah, that would be really useful.
Sure. Well, I suppose
People see
it speaks
opportunity.
to a recognition of identity, right?
Yeah.
If you know somebody's name,
Yeah.
that's the first step in understanding who they are.
Paul Carnegie's, Power to Win Friends and Influence People. It's like, know people's names, say their names.
Yeah.
And Names and Faces is not purely about names, it's also just contact directory. You join my company, we're 50 people. How do I give you 50 people's mobile numbers? We're now all using Zoom, we're using Slack. How do I just give you your Zoom link, your Slack link, your HubSpot link, your whatever tools you use in one consolidated place? So we want to be that kind of exceptional space.
Paul, I love the brutal simplicity of it. In a world where I think everybody's trying to expand and go sideways, you're really zeroing in and making it so elegant and I think in that elegance is going to be its scalability. So I wanted to, just a last question then, you've been in Silicon Valley now for a year, right? You've immersed yourself in this culture and you're really kind of getting to grips with it. What have you learned? I mean, you mentioned, the guy that interviewed you was the chief growth officer at one of the fastest growing companies in history. I mean, that's insane. And with that kind of exposure, what have been the salient things that you've taken on board?
Yeah, so the whole YC experience is pretty extraordinary. You once you're accepted, you then need to be in the States. It's a 3-month program, and I'd recommend anyone who thinks that what they're building is has potential to have global impact.
Sure.
Apply to YC, right? There are people who've applied many times, been rejected many times, but apply. There's absolutely no harm in applying, and it's an amazing experience if you get onto it. So 3 months. You have talks on a weekly basis from great founders. So the founders of Airbnb were the first people who came to speak to us, and it's all arranged around a dinner. And then you have partners who have all been very involved or built fast-growing companies themselves. Many who have failed quite dramatically, but who have a lot of insights. And so you have access to an incredible group of people who, including all the alums. YC have funded 2,000 companies over the last 15 years. And there's an intranet called Bookface, which you can post any question on, and it's a forum. So you think of a mix between Quora and LinkedIn. You have this place where you can go and a repository of information.
Yeah.
And so that's also been one of the amazing things about being over there and having access to, if you want to bounce ideas around funding or bounce ideas around how you should think about go-to-market. There are people who have done this time and time again. The challenge, what have we learned? The challenge is remaining focused. I think one of the things that I always thought we were really fortunate about and did extraordinarily well in the Yuppie Chef journey was we were out in Westlake, right? Everyone else was in the city. And we kind of just generally kept our heads down and built and built and built and built. When you're in the Silicon Valley space where there is so much frenetic activity and, a lot of it is about PR, who's raised what and who's doing what and who's hiring hundreds of people. It's quite difficult to keep your head about you. And I battled for the first couple of months, just to realize I needed to be certain or at least clear on what we were building and almost walk to our own drumbeat while being influenced and pushed by what's happening around you, but not to get totally distracted, because you end up with stories like the WeWork saga, which we're kind of seeing the tail end of now, which...
And to a more extreme, the Theranos story with Elizabeth Holmes and so on, where the hype actually becomes bigger than your purpose and I suppose remaining authentic.
And I almost think that the WeWork story will become more important to founders than the Theranos. The Theranos thing was almost complete fraud. It was complete fraud,
it was
right?
so out there, but WeWork could be...
WeWork was almost WeWork was people just getting caught up in the in the kind of the hype of it all. I think, that being said, there's importance in founders having a big vision and their ability to inspire and to kind of create the future. So there's an element of that is inspiring, but with less, Scott Galloway has coined a term which is yoga babble. Just a little bit less yoga babble. It's like, let's build businesses that are real businesses that ultimately generate real revenue, right? That
with respect to all the yoga practitioners out there in the audience,
with respect to the yoga practitioners.
But I hear you. Yeah. Sometimes you need to have a bit of a lesser sense of your own self-importance and just get down to the basics, right?
Yeah. But I think that the US presents a huge market, which we potentially not that used to operating in a market of that size in a South African context. But I think that we have the skills and the potential within South Africa to build technology that can serve a worldwide audience. And so going back to like what did YCC and names and faces, I think it's like, are you building something that can serve people all around the world? We're living in an age where there is remote working, you can employ people from anywhere in the world. And if you're trying to solve a problem that is universal enough and you solve it in an effective enough way, you can build a really exciting business that can impact people, hire people all over the world, and potentially build a bigger business and make a far bigger economic impact than a business that just serves a market within the bounds of South Africa or one country.
Thank you, Paul. I think that's amazing,
Cool.
and that's super valuable for us in terms of just, it's been amazing just to see your journey and the bounds that you've actually made so far. I know it's just the start, and there's a long way to go,
and it's hard,
and it's super
hard. I mean, let me not try and paint a veneer on this. Our move has been really hard, and getting familiar with the Americans and work. You think you know them, but the culture is quite different.
Sure.
We're really at the beginning of our journey.
But
so
nonetheless, you're pioneering and you're doing great stuff and you're creating something that we as South Africans could be proud of. So well done on the success to date.
Thank you.
And please keep in touch and let
Awesome.
us know how it goes.
Absolutely.
Nice one.
Thanks, Fred.